Welcome to the September brain donation webinar. We're grateful to have all of you guys here to come learn about our brain donation process. And I'm going to pass it off to Madeline.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you, Cassie. I want to first introduce our two of our hosts for this webinar, our social media and digital marketing team, Cassie Ferreira and Amanda Cabral. They will be helping lead the discussion as well at the end, and they're a really integral part of our team. So welcome and thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join us. We're really grateful for everyone's support of our work, and we really want to talk about really what we do on a daily basis and how this work is affecting the future of sports science and all of that fun stuff. So we have a great panel here today. This is our team of clinical research assistants and brain donation coordinators. So these are the individuals that when a family is calling to donate a brain, or if someone's interested in donating their brain, these are the individuals on the other end of the line. These are some of the most caring and compassionate people that you'll ever meet. Everyone is so dedicated to our mission and what we do, and it's just a great, really a great family to be a part of. So you will hear from today our Senior Research Assistant, Evan Nair, one of our research assistants, Farwa Fahim, our data analyst, Bobby Abdul Mohammadi, our study coordinator, Rachel Downs, another one of our research assistants, Stephanie Gonzalez-Gill, and myself, and my name is Madeline. So for any questions during the presentation, feel free to scan the QR code there and have that up so you can type them in, and we can do more of an anonymous Q&A at the end. If you feel more comfortable that way, you can also send them to Cassie in the chat, and we'll make sure that they get asked as well during the Q&A portion at the end.
Okay, so my name is Evan. I'm now going to talk about our donation criteria. And so I want to first start by talking about the types of subjects that we are recruiting into the Unite study, which we'll talk a little bit more about. The common link between all or the vast majority of our brain donors are that they've had repetitive head impact exposure in some way. And so this can be from contact or collision sports, such as American football, ice hockey, soccer, entertainment, or amateur wrestling, or another contact or collision sport. And we also have military veterans as well, and victims of physical violence. So just to talk a little bit more specifically about our subjects, for those that have passed away above the age of 35, we require those folks to have played a contact or collision sport for at least 2 years at the college level or higher. And this can include semi-professional play or professional play. For those that have passed away at ages 35 or under, any level of a contact or collision sport can be done for inclusion in our study, even at the youth level. Like I mentioned, we have military veterans, and for those, it can be at any age. These veterans can have athletic history or not, but they have had either combat exposure or they've had service-related TBIs in their time in the military. We also have a subset of individuals that have passed away from complications due to ALS. And for those folks, we treat them similar to the contact sport level under 35, where they can play youth football for 1 year or higher. We will include them if they've played a contact or collision sport or served in the military. And also we are interested in those that have sustained repeated physical violence. And so these individuals can be any age, they can be male or female. They can be They could have athletic history or medical history or not. And some examples of folks with repetitive physical violence that we have in our brain bank include those that have sustained interpersonal violence or childhood abuse. We have also a small subset of individuals that have sustained second impact syndrome. And so this is a syndrome where an individual suffers a first concussion that has not properly recovered, and then suffers a second concussion soon after the first one. And this can cause brain swelling as well as other rapid symptoms. We have a smaller subset, but we are interested in studying that population as well. Very recently, we are recruiting those that have sustained a single moderate to severe traumatic brain injury. And so if your loved one doesn't apply to any of the criteria that I mentioned previously, but they have sustained a moderate or severe traumatic brain injury, they can be included in this study as well. And we defined a moderate to severe traumatic brain injury as a head injury that has been sustained 30 minutes of conscious or any that have been sustained with evidence of brain bleeding on neuroimaging, or those that have resulted in a skull fracture. And to be included in this study, the individual must have sustained a moderate to severe traumatic brain injury at least 2 years prior to their passing or earlier in their life. And lastly, very recently, we are now accepting controls. And so these are individuals that have no repetitive head impact or single moderate to severe traumatic brain injury exposure. And for those folks, we are recruiting controls, male and female, and they must have passed away earlier than age 50. And besides ALS, they must have not passed away from any neurodegenerative disease. And then, and so for all these folks that I mentioned are inclusion criteria, they also must fit our tissue quality requirements. And so, we do prefer accepting donations where we receive the whole brain, preferably uncut, but in order to be included in our study, at the very minimum, we must receive at least one intact hemisphere. And if the hemisphere is in sections already, we can accept fragments or coronals, but we just ask that there's enough there where we can piece together an intact hemisphere. Another part of our criteria, which I will talk about on the next slide, is that the decedent must not have been on life support in the last month of their life unless they have ALS. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that is on the next slide. We accept donations, both fresh or fixed, and we just ask that the DNRs and pathologists follow our protocols. And so for fresh cases, we ask that the brain to be extracted and put on wet ice following our protocol within 72 hours after the time of the decedent's passing, and with the decedent being in refrigeration. And if the brain is extracted and fixed in formalin, we also accept those donations as well. And we just ask that the brain tissue to be extracted and preserved in formalin following our protocol. And we can go a little bit farther. We accept donations within 4 days after the time of the decedent's passing, with the decedent being in refrigeration prior to that. And we also encourage optional tissue or fluid donations as well. On our consent form, we have blood and cerebrospinal fluid as optional portions that families can check off. And this helps us a lot when studying fluid biomarkers. And about 25% of our donations, we also receive blood and cerebrospinal fluid donations as well. And then just a few notes on the tissue quality. although, we want to accept every donation that fits our criteria, unfortunately, there are things that can happen that makes the brain tissue unable to be examined to a point where we would not be able to provide families with an accurate diagnosis. And this happens about 40 cases per year we're unable to accept. And the majority or a good number of cases have been on life support. And regarding this, during the prolonged period where the decedent is on life support, although the organs is deteriorating, and so when we're examining it and to complete our immunostaining protocols, we are associated with detail that might be there, but we just are unable to view it. And so unfortunately, for those reasons, we're unable to accept any cases that have been on life support at the time of their passing.
My name is Farwa, and I'm going to address one of the concerns that people have, which is whether they can donate organs and also donate their brain to research. The short answer is yes, but there are a few things to consider. Registering as an organ donor does not automatically make you a brain donor. So even if your license states that you're an organ donor, we still may not be able to accept your donation because of our research criteria or the state of the brain tissue. More importantly, brain donation actually depends on whether we can get consent from the next of kin. Another thing to keep in mind is that if someone is an organ donor, the organ donation process will take priority over brain donation, which can cause a delay. And this delay is usually caused due to some of the reasons mentioned in the next point, like the kind of tissues they request and how long the tissue bank would take. The best practice would be to notify the facility that you are considering brain donation so they can work with us to make that happen. At times, they may not let our pathologists or DNRs enter until they're finished, but other times they can also offer to work together. And as Evan mentioned, we do have a 72-hour procurement period. So as long as we're able to do our procurement process before that, a person can donate both their organs and their brain. More often than not, being an organ donor does not prevent people from donating their brain to our center.
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Bobby, formerly one of the brain donation coordinators. I'm going to walk you through some of the initial steps of the actual brain donation process. At the very beginning, we have a 24-hour cell phone, which we refer to as the pager, but it's a hotline, which is effectively manned 24 hours a day, 7 days a week by one of us, one of the brain donation coordinators. And so you'll hear from all of us by the end of the webinar. And so on the initial intake, oftentimes we'll get a call from a medical examiner, an attorney, a family member, a teammate of a prospective donor. And generally speaking, those calls will involve an exchange of information where the individual we're speaking with will say, my loved one, my teammate, and so on, has passed away, or they're imminently going to pass away. They're on hospice, they're whatever the situation is, which is always unique to the individual donor. They will give us that information, and so we'll gather some basic background info, the potential donor's name, their date of birth, and their location, where they are, whether that's in a hospital, funeral home if they passed away, at home, all sorts of different scenarios. And so the first and very important step that we need to take care of is getting the consents from the next of kin or an individual who has power of attorney. So really just a legally authorized representative. It's very imperative that we get the consent forms because we can't proceed with coordinating a brain tissue extraction without those forms, and neither can the funeral homes or the hospitals or the independent deaners that we work with. And actually, I think I see a couple, at least one or two of the deaners that we've worked with on this call. So they'll know what we mean, that it's very important to get those forms. So from there, we begin the process. Once we have the consent forms in hand, we begin the process of reaching out to the proper contacts, whether they're the deaners, medical examiners, funeral homes, and we coordinate with all the parties to get everything organized and get everything scheduled so that we can get the brain tissue extracted and properly preserved and then sent to us in a timely fashion, because as Evan talked about earlier, the brain donation process is very time sensitive, and the sooner we can get everything done, the better. And so in this note, really, as far as what's ideal for us, we like to do fresh tissue donation, so on ice and sent to us by a courier service. But if that's not possible for a variety of circumstances, we can also have the brain fixed in formalin, which gives you a little bit more flexibility in terms of sort of the time sensitivity. So I'll cover some of these now, and then there's going to be a Q&A session at the end. So if there's any additional questions about this process, feel free to note them now, send them to Cassie now, or ask them later. But some of the more frequently asked questions are related to the costs. And so we cover all the costs of brain donation and throughout the entire research process. So the only thing we don't cover is any funeral expenses. Those remain the responsibility of the family, but anything that's related to the research process or the brain extraction and having it sent to us in Boston, we will take care of in full. And we also are often asked whether families are able to have open casket funerals after a brain extraction, and the answer is yes. There's no disfigurement that occurs, and many families have been able to do this without any issues. And then finally, our brain donation program, again, reiterating what Evan had spoken about, it's not just for professional athletes or football players. I think the majority of the public knowledge and the majority of news coverage it's mostly focused on football players, and it's oftentimes focused on former NFL players or college football players. But our research program is not just limited to them. So we encourage individuals or families who are interested in donating with different athletic or military or interpersonal backgrounds to consider reaching out to us.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel, and I take over after the brain has been procured. As the research coordinator, I work with families to explain the process of what comes next, which includes completing interviews with CTE center staff to discuss what the deceased was like in life, how they were presenting in clinic, and they also complete two surveys to sort of figure out their athletic and concussion history, the educational and occupational history, medical history, and the history of and changes of cognitive, behavioral, and mood symptoms. And this can take quite a while to complete. And it correlates with the neuropathological examination of the brain. After the brain is examined, the family will meet with the neuropathologist, usually on Zoom, and receive the findings and go over the diagnosis. They have the opportunity to speak extensively with the neuropathologist to ask any questions that they have and get further explanation of what the disease states were like, if anything was found. And they also have the opportunity to share the donor story through the BU CTE Center and Concussion Legacy Foundation programs. After the diagnosis, the donated brain will be stored in perpetuity in state-of-the-art facilities at our location that's not at the BU CTE Center. They are stored in sub-zero temperatures, and it's amazing to see everything that's there. The brain continues to be used for future research studies at BU and other approved institutions. Studies include biomarker identification through genetics, spinal fluid and blood, imaging diagnostics, and resampling for specific pathological changes. Our research continues. At the Unite Brain Bank, we collect central nervous system tissue samples, brain, spinal cord, and eyes from deceased individuals to better understand the effects of trauma on the human nervous system. Reports are shared to family and caregivers in a timely fashion. This is not only with a call with the neuropathologist, but also in written form. We store and distribute optimally prepared tissue to qualified researchers around the world. And we also share de-identified data with other qualified researchers.
Hello, everybody. My name is Stephanie. As Madeline mentioned earlier, I'm one of the order research coordinators, research assistants, and brain donation coordinators. So you're probably wondering what we use this brain tissue for. And our current research expands between a lot of different facets. We're interested in a lot of different aspects of the brain tissue that we're examining. But here are some examples. So we're very interested in developing and identifying diagnostic tests for CTE in living persons, which currently do not exist. We are very interested in genetic and environmental risk factors that might be present within our pool. We are particularly interested in age as a factor. So the importance of age at first exposure to repetitive head impacts, as well as the role of length in playing career of any kind of sport, or the length of repetitive head impacts. We're very interested in developing and investigating treatments for CTE. And this is in an effort essentially to see how we can care better, how we can give better health care to those who are suffering from CTE, and how we can help their caregivers as well. Our research is divided into 3 different facets. The pathological research, our clinical research, and our molecular research. Our pathological research is where our neuropathologists study the brain and spinal cord tissue so that they can better understand the cause, progression, and characteristics of different neurodegenerative diseases that might be present in that brain. The clinical research is something that follows, as Rachel mentioned, where we conduct and support research designed to identify genetic and environmental risk factors, diagnostic tests, treatments, and more. And this is usually in the form of a clinical interview, which Rachel alluded to. Lastly, we have our molecular research, in which we aim to discover disease mechanisms and develop new diagnostics and treatments for CTE and other neurodegenerative disorders, which we're starting to do more often now. We have special populations that we are interested in further recruiting into our brain bank. Our young brain donors are very crucial for our research because they help us better understand the origins of the disease and how it starts in its progression. It also helps us understand different changes in the brain that might occur earlier on in the process, such as white matter degeneration. Like the slide says, this is often referred to us by medical examiners. So for the medical examiners here, we really appreciate those references. They're very vital to our research. Female brains are also extremely critical for achieving gender equality in the research that we're doing and to further close that gender gap that we currently have. We really want to understand if there are gender differences in CTE. It's very difficult now with only around 3% of our brain bank being female identifying donors. So it's critical for us to start recruiting more of those subjects into our brain bank. And lastly, control brains. These are brains that have no evidence of CTE, and they further help us understand how CTE might differ from a quote unquote normal brain. So we're also looking to recruit a lot of those. And you might be asking why brain donation is important. Brain donation is important because it's often the result of something very tragic, very sad, very heartfelt for families. Our work is crucial for the development of treatments and diagnostics and research, yes, but it's an opportunity for the family to have some closure, to have a further understanding of someone that they knew and loved that they might have been confused about in some way. It allows the families to get something back from this tragic event. And it allows the families also to provide this vital piece of our world-changing research. They will develop ways to identify CTE in living persons, eventually the development of treatments, and it creates this legacy for our brain donors and their families that will impact athletes, veterans, and other victims of repetitive head impacts for generations. So it's very important.
All right, and finally here before our Q&A, I want to talk about how to get involved in the research. I know we have a variety of individuals who might be listening, so there are definitely different ways, one of which is signing up for the Brain Donation Registry. So we partner with the Concussion Legacy Foundation, which is a nonprofit focused on education, outreach, and support for families of individuals who have suffered from concussions, CTE, and other diseases associated with repetitive head impacts. And so they run the Brain Donation Registry. Anyone can pledge to donate their brain, and it's a non-binding commitment at that point, but it's really just to get the conversation started and have that conversation with families that, those are somebody's wishes and that this is what they want to do. And so we highly encourage anyone interested to sign up. Additionally, we've talked a lot about our brain donation program, but and the calls that we get on our brain donation line are primarily from individuals who we have not seen in clinical studies, but we do have several clinical studies going on at the center that ultimately, many of them pledge their brains and pass away. And so we do have the clinical data to go along with the brain pathology. And so currently, we have a few that are enrolling, the largest of which is the HIT study, Head Impact and Trauma Surveillance Study. It's fully online. It takes about an hour or two. It's just an online questionnaire and some brain games. And it's for individuals over the age of 40 who played either tackle football or soccer at any level. So this could be 1 year of youth soccer or 1 year of Pee Wee football. And, we would love to have you as part of the study. And we're really trying to use this, recruiting thousands of individuals over the next few years to help us understand the later life effects on the brain of playing contact sports at all different levels. And this can be individuals, of all genders as well. So this is an effort at trying to, like Stephanie mentioned, close the gender gap in our research. An additional clinical study we have is the Health Outreach Program for the Elderly, the HOPE program. This is an in-person study where individuals who have played high-level contact sports, usually college level and above, come in and have a variety of tests done, including an MRI, a blood draw, cognitive testing, and this is to help us understand, again, how repetitive head impacts affect a person's risk for developing later life neurological disorders, and helping us identify biomarkers by gathering all of this rich data. They come in every year to get evaluated, so we follow them longitudinally. Additionally, Project SAVE, this is a clinical study going on as well to determine how repetitive head impacts or RHI from sports can lead to later life neurological deficits or cognitive impairments, mood disorders, and also to help identify biomarkers. And this is exclusively for more older individuals over the age of 50 who've played at least 5 years of a contact sport. And then two others I want to talk about as well. The FIND CTE study, focused imaging for the neurodegenerative disease, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. This is exclusively for former NFL players between the ages of 45 and 74. And this is focused on understanding different imaging techniques that can be used to hopefully help identify CTE in living persons, so that we can diagnose and then hopefully treat it. And then lastly, our newest study, this is actually not a clinical research study, but more of a focused recruitment effort. We are collaborating with the Lab for Science and Health and Artistic Performance, the SHAPE Lab at Ohio University, led by Dr. Jeff Russell, who specializes in treating individuals with concussions sustained during performance arts, so stunt performing in particular. So we are working with them to have individuals pledge their brains to donate, so that we have a cohort. We're calling them the SPRINT cohort, Stunt Performance Research Investigating Neurological Trauma. So we can then understand how the effects of repetitive head impacts in stunts can affect later life brain health. We already have individuals who have signed up. It's great. So these can be individuals who have been either in movies or TV as stunt performers, or more amateur level stunt performers, individuals. A lot of them have experience in martial arts, in things like skateboarding, or different aspects and relations to that. So we're currently actively enrolling for that, where individuals will pledge to donate their brains. And with that, I will take it over and give the floor over to Cassie for our Q&A.
Hello. So I pulling up the QR code from earlier in the presentation. You may have already answered this, but I'm just going to reiterate. Can brains that have already been, or people that have already been evaluated, donate their brain?
So yeah, that's a great question. One of the things I think Evan mentioned at the beginning was we require a certain quality of brain tissue to be able to study at our center. So if it's already been sampled and studied, there are circumstances where we will take it and accept it for study ourselves, but primarily we require an uncut whole brain. But sometimes we'll do collaborations with different labs or different centers where we'll get a hemisphere and they'll keep a hemisphere. So it really depends on the circumstances.
All right, perfect. And then this one I'm going to direct towards Bobby. When does the donor family receive their results?
So correct me if I'm wrong, Rachel, but I think now we're at 9 to 12 months roughly following the initial intake of a case.
That's about right, Bobby. It's about 9 to 12 months.
Perfect. All right.
And that's for everything, clinical diagnoses and neuropathological diagnoses. So that the whole research process should be wrapped up in that time frame.
Correct.
And then what paperwork is involved with the process?
So yeah, I can also, is this specific to the donation process at the beginning?
Yes.
So as far as what a donor's family would be filling out for paperwork, the main one would be the consent form. And so the consent form, it's a 3 or 4 page document, which effectively just is getting permission from the family or the next of kin to allow an extractor to take out the tissue and to allow us to conduct medical research on the tissue. And so again, that specific piece of paperwork is really important because we can't start the process without it, but it is ultimately a pretty short document. And As far as anything else, it's not paperwork, but there are some electronic surveys which are part of the research process, which are more down the line. That's when we're doing our clinical protocol. So those are after we get the brain and much less time sensitive.
Perfect. Thank you. And then this one's going to go to Farwa. When a case is rejected because of poor tissue quality, what options does the family have left if they still want to continue the research in some way?
That's a great question. So we actually help the family in like finding other potential brain banks that might be able to accept the brain tissue, because every brain bank has different criteria and different research criteria, and even for tissue quality. Another thing we can do is encourage families to share their stories on our partnering organization CLF, or even on our own website.
Perfect. Thank you. And then Stephanie, we're going to ask, can you talk a little bit about confidentiality? Who will see my results and in what way?
Absolutely. So in terms of confidentiality, everything that all the information that we receive and any information that might allude to this, the person who is donating, is declassified. So we only work with a subject number that they're assigned to. Nobody besides the people who are supposed to know the name of the person, which is the brain donation coordinators, as well as our pathology team who will be speaking to the family. Those are the only people that know the name of the person. They are the ones who know the information and the medical history, and they are the ones working with that sensitive information and data. So the information is kept confidential. We also work with the family depending on their wishes to increase that level of confidentiality, which we've done in the past.
All right. Thank you.
Can I just add just a couple more things to that? So yeah, everything that Stephanie said, we reiterate, confidentiality is of the utmost importance to all of us. When we share the pathology report, we only share the pathology report with the next of kin. We only send one out. If there's any reason that anyone besides the next of kin wants the pathology report, we will approach the next of kin and ask them, and we have a separate release form if they grant approval to send the pathology report out. And this happens mostly with medical examiners, because when a donation comes in, the ME has jurisdiction over the tissue, and so they might ask us, if we send the brain to you, would you all be able to share the final report? It helps us with our, producing our report. And in that case, we will approach the next of kin and talk to them about it. And so just wanted to say that as well.
Perfect. Thank you. Evan, don't mute yourself yet, because the next question is coming right to you. This is from the chat. So it says, do you have any trainings for the new staff to teach them how to talk to families about brain donation?
Kathy, I'm so sorry.
Did you want me to repeat it?
Yeah, sorry, my Wi-Fi cut out. I apologize.
No problem at all. They're asking if you use any trainings for new staff to teach them how to talk to families about brain donation.
To talk to families. I will definitely try to answer this. So we are hoping to use these webinars as a way to help families talk about brain donation. And also, during our clinical protocols, we go through a pretty long phone call with the family, or a virtual interview where we, I think we alluded to during our presentation, but we acquire a lot of different symptom histories, clinical, TBI, concussion history. And so if the family has any questions, we always answer. And to the best of our ability. And just getting the word out is especially important. That's, a big reason with our partners over at CLF. They work to help just get the word out about brain donation, working with individuals that have experienced symptoms due to their head impact exposure, and work with in community outreach. And so that organization definitely works there, very closely with families to get the word out about donation.
Yeah, and adding to that, Cassie, I think part of the question, from my understanding, was any staff that works with us, our big team. We have about 60 people on our team here. Everyone is trained in confidentiality, working with sensitive data, working with the tissue, as well as kind of the ins and outs of how the brain donation process works. So all of our coordinators go through extensive training on how to do this process. And so it's smooth, we ensure that it's smooth every single time, that everyone feels comfortable talking about this topic, because it can be extremely difficult for a lot of individuals. And it's very sad when you're talking to families about losing a loved one. And so we go through a lot of training to be able to do this. And it is, not something that we take lightly either. And the other piece Evan mentioned about the phone calls, and I think is important to say, is that anyone who does those phone calls with the families, so gathering the clinical history after the brain has been received, they're all blinded to the pathology findings. So those phone calls are done without knowing what the brain actually looks like. And the people that are looking at the brain, so the pathology team, they don't know the clinical history of the donor. And so they have, the whole brain bank of individuals also housed with other brains of different brain banks. And so there are, our investigators look at brains from different studies, one of which being the Boston University Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, the BUADRC. So they're blinded as well to the clinical history. So there is this whole blinded process that we go through to have everything de-identified, so that we're very objective in our data collection.
Perfect, thank you. So for the next question, I'm gonna go back to Bobby, just because you talked about the consent forms earlier. Someone asked, can the consent forms be partially filled out months before the death?
Yeah, so we can definitely get consent forms in advance. Usually this sort of scenario would be if a family has a sense of someone maybe passing away within weeks to months, and they want to get everything organized in advance, and we can facilitate the process of sending you the forms and getting them back from you. And then that way, if something were to happen, we would be prepared and we wouldn't have to go through that process of getting them within that sort of tight time frame. I think another point I'll make on top of that is that oftentimes part of the reason why we have the 24-hour phone is because, unfortunately, very often a lot of the deaths that individuals will call about are unexpected or under tragic circumstances, and there's many in those scenarios we don't have consent for. We don't even most of the time have any type of contact with the families beforehand, and so we have to do everything kind of in this quick time frame. But for other instances where there's a little bit more of advance notice, we can definitely get the consent forms filled out in advance.
Awesome, thank you. Really quick, I see that they're asking if the webinar and all the others will be put on our webpage. We do have a page on our website for our webinars. We also will be putting them up on YouTube, as well as kind of making sort of a shorter highlight reel almost, that we will also be posting to our website as well as our social medias. And then one more, I'm going to direct this at you, Madeline. Do you have a list of donors that you work with, and what service do you use to ship the brains to you?
Yeah, great question. So I know potentially some of the deaners might be on here too, but we do have a list. We have individuals that we work with in every state, some individuals that are comfortable traveling across states as well. But, particularly in the bigger states, that could be multiple people. California is a big state. And so we have people in all the regions that we work with. And we feel very lucky and pride ourselves on the relationships we've built with our deaners and our pathologists as well that do these extractions for us, because they know how important the research is and also want to support and help. But we're not afraid to call them at all hours of the night, knowing that we have a brain donation coming, and we do have a great list of individuals. We've also referred out some of these contacts to other brain banks, as well as led trainings with some of the other BU affiliated brain centers, the ADRC and the Framingham Heart Study. So we are happy to do that too, because we do this a lot. We're on the phone, every single day. We're talking to people, and so this is a very familiar process to a lot of us. And so for any questions, we're always open and willing to help.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Madeline, I'm actually going to come right back to you for one more question. Going off of the question about the consent forms being filled out months in advance, is there a way that potential donors themselves can sign the consent forms, or does it have to be next of kin?
So Evan, I think you probably might know this better than me, but I think it varies by state and by the circumstance of which their passing might occur. I believe. Is that right?
Yeah, it is a state by state basis, and we do require the next of kin to sign all of our consent forms, regardless of state. But we do work with our legal team in that aspect to see if a donor can sign up, while they're still living. So for all of these cases, we approach our lawyers, and regardless too, we also get signature from next of kin.
Can I just add a little something to that? Technically, when somebody passes, their body does not belong to them any longer. It passes to the next of kin to make decisions for. So that's why we consult, and it varies state by state.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right. And next question, I'm going to direct towards you, Rachel. How do we learn about new findings and research as it happens?
Just stay in touch with our studies, just keep reading, and that's the best way to find out. Our websites do a great job of sharing the research that we put out, and which includes papers by esteemed colleagues and presentations at various conferences here. I mean, Evan just recently presented, and it was fantastic.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And then this last question, I believe, unless we get more in the chat or on that QR code from earlier, this one's going to go to Stephanie. Can you just talk a little bit more about the process of sharing tissue with other researchers and other institutions and the confidentiality with that?
So actually, Cassie, I'm not entirely familiar. I've never had to go through the process myself of sharing tissue. So I think Evan or Madeline would be better fit for that question.
Of course.
Yeah, I could talk a little bit about that. So we have a tissue request coordinator that works on the pathology team. And so for each tissue request, it has to go through them, and there are specific requirements and it goes under review with our neuropathologist and pathology team. So there is a process, but all of the requests have to go through our tissue request coordinator.
Awesome. Perfect. I think that is all of the questions. Oh, wait, somebody just checked. Okay, I have one more question. Anybody can take this. Can a DPOA, a lawyer, be considered next of kin?
So
Again,
there,
yeah.
yeah, do you want to go ahead, Madeline?
Okay.
Okay, so we follow a like a hierarchy of who can sign our consent forms. And so if a certain person is not reasonably available, or they don't exist, it follows down this hierarchy until we get the right person to sign our form. In terms of power of attorney, it does vary state by state. The top of our hierarchy, if someone is considered an agent or the executor of a state. And so for these cases, we need the paperwork, and we need to have our lawyers review the paperwork to see if there's specific language, regarding an anatomical donation. But the executor of a state or an agent of the donor is at the top of our hierarchy. And then it goes to the spouse, adult children, parents, etc. And so if there is a situation, where there's power of attorney, we just need to know a little bit more information and see if they can consent for anatomical donation. And if that is the case, then, by all means, you can sign the forms. And then Madeline, if there's anything else you want to add, feel free.
Yeah, no, that's pretty much it. The power of attorney, depending on the state, as our legal team would say, it differs, and it depending on what expires when someone passes away, what the authority is of that person at that time, because ultimately this is a post-mortem donation. So we always need the paperwork to indicate that, and we always say to families, we can't make any promises that the donation actually happens. We do everything in our power to be able to get the donation to us and preserved properly. But sometimes it just isn't possible. And there are circumstances that happens. So we do everything we can, on our end, all of the legwork, and hopefully be able to help, as many families as possible.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. And I just want to put this up here that this is that brain donation hotline that we had been talking about, that we had referred to as a pager or a 24-hour phone. So this will be open and manned by one of our donation coordinators 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So if anybody wants to take a quick screenshot, take a picture, jot that down, I'll leave it up on the screen for a couple seconds there. Oh, it looks like we have, somebody just said thank you. And then thank you guys so much for coming to this webinar. I believe our next webinar will either be October or November. If you want to join that, we will be sending out and publicizing around the same way on our socials, on our website, sending it out through email, everything like that. The QR code on the screen will lead you back to our website, so that if you have any other questions that you would like answered, you can find them on our website, or you can get in contact with us through the Contact Us tab on our webpage. And then right next to it is all of our social medias. If you want to connect with us on one of those are also manned 24/7 by one of me or Amanda. Thank you guys so much for coming. And thank you so much to the brain coordinators and the donation coordinators that helped put this on. You guys were invaluable for the entire process. Thank you.